This is a production of Gordon College's Scot Radio.
Scot Radio.
Hey there, everyone, and welcome back to the Photo Finish, Scot Radio's home for motorsports. I'm your host, Ben Schneider. Last week was super busy for me, so I ended up not doing a show. And it's the off-season, so news has been kind of slow anyway. I don't have a co-host tonight, but I do have one final podcast to bring you guys to the end of this semester, so let's jump right into it. The first thing I want to start with is a short review of the new movie Ford v Ferrari. This is a story of Le Mans in 1966, a 24-hour race, and what led up to that for the Ford team, and Ford's decision to go ahead and start a sports car race team that would compete at the 24 Hours of Le Mans to take down Ferrari. And it kind of tells the whole story of the events that led to that. It stars Matt Damon, Christian Bale, and I have to say, if I were to rate the movie, I'd give it a solid 8 out of 10. I think it was very well done as a cinematic production. I think we have to remember that when we're, particularly as race fans, looking at the film, and I know there were some historical inaccuracies, and I'll get to that in a second, but when you look at it as a movie, I think it's about as good as you could ask for. We're not watching a documentary. We're not watching archival footage. When you consider all those things, the whole thing was very well done. And I think Matt Damon and Christian Bale in particular, both of them deserve Oscars for their performance. Matt Damon totally won me over in particular. I know when he was announced as Carroll Shelby, I thought to myself for a second, I don't really know how it's going to work. You know, he's not the guy that I would have picked. He totally won me over. He did a phenomenal job playing Carroll Shelby, and Christian Bale did a phenomenal job playing Ken Miles. The accent wasn't quite on the mark, but when you consider everything that goes into playing that role, you really couldn't ask for much more from him either. And he actually has been nominated. It was just announced for Best Actor in a Drama at the 77th Golden Globe Awards, so it'll be interesting to see how that process goes, but I think that's totally well-deserved. I won't spoil the movie too much for you in case you want to go see it, but I have to say I highly recommend it, even if you're not a race fan. If you want a story of the American dream, maybe you're just into cars, you drive a Ford yourself, you want to learn more about the story, I highly, highly recommend it. I do have to say, the one thing that did bug me the most was the race that they showed at Daytona. And if you're a race fan, you already probably know this because you've been scrolling through social media and reading reviews already. But the race at Daytona wasn't shot on location at Daytona. It was actually shot at Fontana Speedway, or Auto Club Speedway, rather, in Fontana, California. And they did their best. They painted the walls to say Daytona instead of Auto Club. And it's got an infield road course. It's a 2-mile track. Of course, Daytona's 2.5. The oval at least is. So, it's not like they went to Bristol and tried to pass Bristol off as Daytona. They at least made an effort, considering the fact that they were using Auto Club Speedway. But some of the footage was shot in Georgia, which, if you think geographically, that's not too far from Daytona Beach. So logistically, I get it. California is closer to Hollywood and LA and all that area. But I would have, at the same time, I think to myself, how much of a dent would it really put in your budget to go to Daytona and get the accuracy right on point? So that was disappointing. The other major thing that I noticed was the big final race, the 1966 24 Hours of Le Mans. Enzo Ferrari was in attendance, and if you know anything about Enzo Ferrari, he very rarely, if ever, actually showed up to the racetrack to watch his teams compete. So that was another thing that, as a race fan who knows this kind of stuff, kind of bothered me. But if you're just a casual viewer, willing to look past all of that, and even if you're not, like I said, I thoroughly enjoyed the movie. I've actually gone to see it twice. So I highly recommend it, and hope you guys go check it out. I think it's a great film. We had a Grand Prix in December. I think, to my knowledge, it's the first time we've been able to say that regarding the F1 calendar. But of course, we didn't do a show last week, but I'll talk about it a little bit. The Abu Dhabi Grand Prix for Formula One, and pretty so-so race. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it. There's not a whole lot to say. Abu Dhabi as a facility is phenomenal. The racetrack, especially at night when they put the lights on and the facility is visually stunning. It's a beautiful place aesthetically. But when you think about the quality of the racing there, particularly the last few years, hasn't been too great. I wouldn't say it was the worst race of the year by any means. I think the French Grand Prix definitely takes the cake on that one. But another reason it wasn't the most exciting race is because we had a very unsurprising winner, Lewis Hamilton, winning yet again. And he's up to 84 Grand Prix victories now. And I've got to say, guys, I think Michael Schumacher's 91 is going down next year. I don't see anything stopping Lewis from going out and winning another 8 or 9 races, in which case he'll have 92 or 93. And by the end of the year, he'll have eclipsed the record. So not only is the wins record in danger for Michael Schumacher, but his championships record is too. Because Lewis, of course, in the United States Grand Prix earlier this year, clinched his 6th world championship, and Michael has 7. So Lewis is not only on the verge of equaling Michael's wins, but also his championships. And, you know, you can say what you will about the kind of controversial lifestyle and outgoing lifestyle Lewis Hamilton lives, but you cannot question his ability as a race car driver. And I just wish fans would all come together and respect and appreciate what we're seeing from him and Mercedes right now. There's very rarely been a pairing, not just in F1, not just in motorsports, but in all of sport, that has been able to put together as many special things as we've seen Hamilton and Mercedes put together the last few seasons. And I think we really need to appreciate what we're watching in the moment, because we have new regulations coming in 2021. Hamilton's obviously much closer to the end of his career than the beginning, still clearly in his prime, and I could see him only continuing to add to his records next season and beyond. So I think we really need to acknowledge and appreciate what we're seeing out of him. So another great victory from him, pretty much a flawless weekend. I will say the one interesting thing about this race was for the first 18 laps or so, I forget the exact number, but the DRS system went out. So we didn't have any of that. And maybe I'll explain briefly if you're a NASCAR fan or, you know, don't know all the technicalities of Formula One. DRS stands for Drag Reduction System. And it is a tool available to the drivers when they're within 1 second of the car ahead of them that opens the rear wing of the car up to allow more air to flow through and thus reduce drag, hence the name drag reduction. So the idea behind it is that it is supposed to aid in overtaking, and fans have a divided opinion on it. A lot of people think it's gimmicky. I tend to agree with them, but you can't deny that usually it does its job, and it does lead to an increase in the amount of overtakes we'd see as opposed to if we didn't have it. And we didn't have it for the first third or so of the race this week, or this past weekend, rather. And I think it made, maybe not for a higher quality race, obviously, but certainly added some intrigue to it. And particularly because Valtteri Bottas, Hamilton's Mercedes teammate, was forced to start at the back of the pack, taking some grid penalties. I think it was for an engine change. Late in the season, those things tend to pile up sometimes, but Bottas was trying to work his way through the midfield. And with how much better his Mercedes is, you would think most of the time it would be relatively easy for him to work through the field. And it was, but it wasn't as easy as it would have been had he had the DRS advantage added on and been able to use that. So it was interesting to see comparing, you know, when we see Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull drivers have to start at the back of the grid and work their way up on a normal race weekend, how long that process took when we took the DRS away. And Bottas ended up finishing 4th. I'd like to think maybe, you know, it'd be interesting to consider if he had DRS, could he have been able to work his way all back up to the podium? Obviously, we won't know, but that certainly added some interesting aspects of the race. But again, aside from that, nothing too memorable. Championship was already wrapped up. So all I can really say is congrats to Lewis and Mercedes on yet another phenomenal year. And I don't see anything slowing them down next season. And one final note I want to bring up regarding F1. This was basically all but confirmed, but now we can say the whole F1 grid is filled out because Nicholas Latifi, the young Canadian driver, has been named as Robert Kubica's replacement at Williams. So Latifi served as a test and reserve driver at Williams this year. I think absolutely deserving of a call-up. If you're a Williams fan, though, I wouldn't get my hopes up too much, unfortunately. I think Latifi is certainly capable of doing the job, but when you consider the car that Williams have put forth the past couple of seasons, with no major regulation changes expected next season, obviously major ones coming in 2021, I don't see anything that would catapult Williams up significantly into the midfield, fighting the other midfield teams there. I think they're still probably going to finish last in constructors next year, no matter who you put in that car, which is unfortunate. And of course, I think we're all pulling for the team to get their act together and return to, if not the front of the grid, at least the midfield, so that we can see their drivers at least fighting for something. But I don't know that, some people think Latifi's going to come in and, Kubica underperformed. I don't think you're going to see much of a difference. I think they're still going to struggle to score so much as, just a handful of constructor points next year over Williams. But I hope I'm wrong. I hope they get up there. I hope they start fighting Haas and Racing Point and some of the other teams in the midfield. So we'll see what happens. One major piece of IndyCar news that broke just within the last couple of days, Conor Daly, one of the most popular drivers in the series, has been sidelined for the last year or so with only part-time gigs in the IndyCar series. He is joining Ed Carpenter Racing in 2020, and it's not a full season deal, but it's almost a full season deal. It's all the road courses. Of course, road courses make up about 2/3 of the schedule these days, so it is technically most of the races. And he'll also drive a third car for the team at the Indianapolis 500. And one interesting thing that I want to note regarding Daly is if you think about how the IndyCar schedule is lined up, you have all road courses before the Indianapolis 500. The way the schedule works these days, the Indianapolis 500 is the first oval race. And then after we run the Indy 500, we go to the doubleheader at Detroit. And you have double points in Indianapolis. You have obviously double points with the double races at Detroit. If Conor Daly is able to get off to a good start and is in the fight for the championship, would Ed Carpenter Racing be able to find a way to get him to whatever the next oval is? I think it's Texas. And get him to be able to run the full season. And I don't know if that's out of the question. We'll see how Conor's able to perform. I'm hopeful. I'm certainly a fan of him. I know a lot are, and I think he's a talented driver. It's been unfortunate to see him not be able to put anything full-time together in a while. So hopefully he's able to perform well, and this leads to bigger and better things to come for him. All right, so we've got some NASCAR news I want to roll through. Obviously, I can't cover everything because we haven't been on air for a while, and lots of silly season stuff is broken. So I'll just highlight some of the major things and more recent stuff. The big development that was very unexpected that broke yesterday is Cole Pearn is out at Joe Gibbs Racing by choice. He has resigned. He's cited a need to spend more time with his family, and this is very interesting if you're a Martin Truex Jr. fan, obviously, because that crew chief driver pairing, Cole Pearn and Martin Truex Jr., has been one of the most successful pairings we've seen in recent history. They've scored 24 wins together in 5 seasons across 2 different teams, and Pearn is responsible for 24 of Truex's 26 career victories. So, I know Martin's a good driver, obviously. He's a champion, but my first thought when I heard this was, this is not good if you're a Martin Truex Jr. fan. I'm not saying that this is going to kill his career or be something that is a major roadblock, but I do think you're going to see, obviously it's going to take time to develop chemistry with whoever his new crew chief is going to be, and I think that pairing worked so well together that I'm not sure they're going to be able to, at least right off the bat, rekindle that same chemistry and success that he had with Cole Pearn as his crew chief. If you had to compare this, I'd say this is maybe like Chad Knaus leaving Hendrick after 2008, 2009, something like that. You think of how successful he and Jimmy Johnson were back in the day. This is basically modern-day equivalency to that. Truex has finished first, second, and second the last 3 years in the championship, and he just won 7 races this past year. So, you would not want to break this relationship up if you didn't have to. And, I totally respect Cole's decision to take a step back, and I know the NASCAR schedule is very taxing on not just its drivers, but its crew chiefs and all of its personnel. I respect the decision to want to pursue opportunities that allow you to spend more time with your family. But if we look at it from a standpoint of what does this mean for Truex in his career, I'd be nervous if I were a Truex fan heading into 2020. My hope is that he can find a good crew chief who work with him and work with him well and develop chemistry quickly, and they can pick up right where they left off. But I would not be surprised if you see the 19 team struggle to get up to speed, at least in the first quarter or third of the season next year. Some more news that I'm personally really excited about. Dale Earnhardt Jr. has led this movement for the last few months, starting on his podcast, to go out to North Wilkesboro Speedway and weed the track, clear the surface, so that it can be scanned for iRacing. And that process was made a reality yesterday and will continue to be worked on in the coming days and weeks so that iRacing can scan the track and have its surface digitally preserved. Now, if you're not familiar with North Wilkesboro Speedway, I'll compare it to Nazareth Speedway, which, if you remember one of the first shows we did this semester, I went out to Nazareth myself earlier in the semester, and North Wilkesboro is basically in a similar state to what Nazareth is in, except the surface of the track is still salvageable. If you wanted to fix up the track and bring racing back to the facility, it would not require. Well, I say that, but I think of the state that the buildings and grandstands are in. But it would not require, I think, as much of a complete demolition as it would at Nazareth. Nazareth has trees growing out of the racing surface. North Wilkesboro just has weeds and a few cracks. So the surface is still, obviously, they're scanning it for iRacing. The surface is still relatively intact. The facility, obviously, it's abandoned. Obviously, it's a ghost town. And obviously, it's in disarray, but it's not quite as in disarray as what Nazareth is in. So I'm very excited. I personally don't do iRacing, but I know a lot of people do, and a lot of people are going to be excited to relive what it was like to race on the track. And, I see all these fans excited on Twitter, which is great, but, people think that this is going to lead to a return to actual real-life racing there. Don't get your hopes up. That's all I'll say. The people, I don't think, understand unless they've seen the pictures and know the whole story, just how bad it is. I mean, yes, obviously the surface is still relatively intact, unlike Nazareth, but the garage is partially collapsed. The old garage that used to host the Cup cars that race there. Obviously, you would need to completely rebuild that. The grandstands, likewise. Absolutely not in the current state that they're in. Could they host 50,000 race fans, or however many the capacity would be? So if you're hoping to see a return to NASCAR return to North Wilkesboro Speedway in the coming immediate future, I would say definitely hold your horses. We're definitely a long ways away from that if it ever happens, and I have my doubts that it ever will. I'd love to go back to North Wilkesboro. I think it would be a great story. But ultimately, with all the hurdles, all the renovations that would have to be done, everything you'd have to clear, I just don't see it happening. But it's great that the history will be preserved over in iRacing, and I think that's a really good thing. And speaking of iRacing, a driver that is an iRacer himself, Michael Waltrip might tell you that he learned to race on a computer, although that's not entirely true. But Ty Majeski, late model driver, competed part-time in ARCA this year. It was just announced today that he'll be replacing Ross Chastain at Niece Motorsports in the Truck Series, driving with number 45. Now, Ross has actually come out and said that he will continue to pursue opportunities in all three series. Of course, he's full-time with Colleague Racing next year. But I think Ty Majeski is a great choice. It's great to see Chevrolet start backing him. And if we saw anything from Ross Chastain's run this year, we know that Niece is now capable of making a championship run with a good driver behind the wheel. And I think Ty Majeski is a great choice, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he could do. He ran the Phoenix race with Niece at the end of this season. So he already knows the team a little bit. It'll be interesting to see what he can put together over the course of the full season. Anthony Alfredo, former K&N driver, part-time Truck Series racer with DJR Crossley last year. He'll be running in the Xfinity Series part-time for Richard Childress Racing. And the news was kind of surprising to me. Seems Alfredo was getting the promotion a little bit earlier than I was expecting, at least. But I know he's definitely had strong runs in the past, and when you think about that 21 RCR car and what it went through this year, it's going to be hard to do worse in that car than what Joe Graf Jr. did this season. And I hate saying that, but Graf, when you go out and D&Q in equipment that your teammate Tyler Reddick is winning a championship with, what does that say? I guess I'll just leave it at that. But Alfredo's going to have a good car underneath him. Obviously, RCRs, we talk about their Cup program all the time and how far that's fallen and how much they've underperformed in recent seasons. But their Xfinity program, obviously, with Reddick's championship, is still pretty good. So it's a good opportunity for Alfredo. We'll see what he can do. Back to the Truck Series, Halmar Friesen Racing, the 52 team with Stuart Friesen. They are moving from Chevrolet and an alliance with GMS Racing to Toyota and an alliance with Kyle Busch Motorsports. This, to me, is only going to make the team stronger. I don't expect too many changes over there. Friesen will be back, obviously, but GMS is obviously a top team. KBM is obviously a top team. So when you align yourself with good people, you expect good results for yourself. I don't expect too many changes over at HFR, and maybe, if anything, you'll see improvement in Friesen go from winning just a couple of races like he did this season to competing for a championship. And, of course, he competed for a championship this past year, making him championship 4, but I'll get into some way too early predictions at the end of the show, but I think you could really see Friesen make a championship run next year with this new alliance. Most popular driver awards were announced, and no real surprises in any of the top 3 series. Obviously, Chase Elliott, we all knew he was going to win, and I think it's going to be another situation like his father, Bill, and in recent years, Dale Earnhardt Jr. I think this is really just going to be no contest as long as Chase Elliott is running full-time in Cup. He's going to be the perennial most popular driver. So no surprise to see him win in the Cup Series. Justin Allgaier won in the Xfinity Series. Again, not much of a surprise there. He's got a pretty loyal fan base. And Ross Chastain taking the NASCAR world by storm the last season and a half or so. Great story that he was able to put together this season, nearly winning a championship. He was named the most popular driver in trucks. So congratulations to the 3 of them. And finally, Joey Logano, just today, was out at ISM Raceway testing the next-gen car. So he's now the second driver to get behind the wheel of the test for that. Austin Dillon was the first doing so at Richmond earlier this season. And they're testing all sorts of different things on the car, large spoilers, short spoilers, and different ride heights, all sorts of good stuff like that, trying to figure out what will produce the best racing. And I have to say, looking at social media, everybody got super excited when they saw the tiny spoiler come on at the end of the day today. I want to remind you guys, obviously the high downforce produced some pretty bad racing at some tracks this year. So I understand why you guys want the shorter spoiler, but we've had shorter spoilers with the Gen 6 car before, namely in 2018, and people complained about the racing then as well. So it's not all in the spoiler. I wish fans on Twitter would recognize that they are not mechanical and aerodynamic engineers, and let's refrain judgment until we see the finished product, see it on track for a couple races in 2021, and then we'll make a judgment call, and then we can give our opinions and see what needs to be tweaked, what's working, what's not working. Definitely hold your horses when it comes to either praising or condemning what you think this next-gen car is going to race like. You can have your opinions, but don't send any threats NASCAR's way or just sing constant blind praises to their name either. Let's hold out judgment and see how it turns out. And finally, to close the show, I want to give you guys some way too early 2020 championship predictions. So I'll go through top 3 series in NASCAR, IndyCar, and F1 and give my reasoning. Cup Series, it worked for me last year. I'm going to try it again this year. I'm going to stick with Kyle Busch. I think he's the best driver in the sport right now. When you look at what he's been able to do in recent years, across all 3 series, but in Cup in particular, finally getting that second championship this year, I think he's going to have another good season. I see no reason to bet against him. That's really all I have to say. I think he's got to be the early favorite heading into 2020 to repeat as champion. In the Xfinity Series, I'm going to go with Justin Allgaier. Allgaier will be back with Junior Motorsports, and when I think about all the talent that is moving up, not just all the talent that is moving up to the Cup Series, but all the talent that is going away in Xfinity. And when I talk about drivers moving up, I also talk about teams that are, if not closing, at least haven't announced plans for next season yet. I don't really know how many strong full-time Cup-level teams we're going to have, or at least Cup teams that are running Xfinity programs, rather. I don't know how many of those we're going to see next year. SHR's program is up in the air, so is Richard Childress Racing's 2-car. We don't know what's going to happen to Tyler Reddick's old ride. I think when you look at who's left, Junior Motorsports and Justin Allgaier, I think that has to be your favorite. He's obviously got the most experience. He's my pick to be the champion next year. And he made the championship for this year, so he made a run at it this season. I know he's capable of doing it. He's my pick there. Truck Series, I'm going to go with Stuart Friesen. He'll be back. I think you're seeing Truck Lifer form out of him. I don't see him really ever leaving that series or moving up unless a phenomenal opportunity were to open up for him. I think he's happy in the Truck Series, and I think, like I said, with this new switch to Toyota, I think that could lead to even bigger and better things for that team. So he's my way too early Truck Championship prediction. Looking at the IndyCar Series, yes, I'm biased because I'm a fan of this driver, and I've been a fan of this driver since before he was even in the IndyCar Series, but I'm going to go with Alexander Rossi. And I think when you look at what Rossi has been able to do when he's hitting on all cylinders, particularly last season, he won by 20-some-odd seconds at Long Beach, won by half a minute when we went to Road America. I think if Rossi can get that chemistry with his Andretti team, and if they can put together good enough cars for him to go out and compete for wins on a weekly basis, I have a hard time seeing anybody stopping him next year. So he's my pick. Certainly, you could go with Scott Dixon, Joseph Newgarden. I'm sure they're going to come back very, very strong as well, but I'm going to go with Rossi. And in Formula One, this should be no surprise. I think Lewis Hamilton is going to win another championship. Obviously, no major regulation changes coming in. We hear every year that this is Ferrari's year, and every year we get to the summer break and we're disappointed because we realize it's not going to be Ferrari's year. Mercedes have the upper hand again. No matter what happens in testing, no matter how much Mercedes seem to say, I think we're the underdogs, I think Ferrari have the edge, it always seems to be Mercedes and Hamilton emerging once we get into the real heart of the season. So Hamilton's my pick over there. And that's going to be it for this week's edition of the Photo Finish, and that's it for this semester. So until then, we'll see you guys in the coming months. Have a good night, everybody.